In this world, boiling water did not produce sufficient steam power. But Gawain had not given up on creating a universal kind of motor machinery. Back on Earth, the Industrial Revolution had replaced all inefficient methods of production. Gone were the workshops. Gone were scarce commodities. All were replaced by roaring engines that launched human civilization into the space age. Gawain closed his eyes. Goods were produced in the thousands by the second. Machines drilled through mountains and bored tunnels. Tractors and harvesters roamed the fields in place of livestock and crude tools. On Earth, machine was king, to the extent that AI voices read out audio dramas. They were simply more efficient, more inexhaustible than human beings. And the fact that they were brought into being reflected humankind's true power, the spirit of innovation. Gawain opened his eyes, perusing his blueprints. He knew of the side effects of the Industrial Revolution, too. The smog that filled the London air, the excessive mining of natural resources, the poor labour conditions. Still, Gawain was confident industrial progress would be good for mankind in this world of magic. His eyes narrowed, especially in the face of a second dark wave. To kickstart the Industrial Revolution, he would need to find a replacement for the steam engine. Things like gears and levers and water wheels worked in this world. And thanks to the power of magic, certain advancements could be made in leaps and bounds that were impossible on Earth. High-quality steel could be smelted through magic from all sorts of alloys and crystals, for example. But the mages of this world did not use magic to innovate. Gawain looked at a cylindrical structure on one of his blueprints. He drew a cross over this structure. What will replace steam? Energy is derived from changing states and forms, chemical reactions, bursts of energy and pressure. Gawain's mind went to Rebecca crystals. Explosions, put simply, are a form of chemical reaction. Cars on Earth all had combustion engines which were basically just safe explosions. Could the Rebecca crystal's power be similarly contained? Gawain pondered it for a while before shaking his head. No. Magical explosions are different from gunpowder and simple ignitions on Earth. Rebecca crystals were essentially spells, and the effect of these spells was an explicit order to explode. Before the crystals even begin to burst, the first reaction produced is the effect of a spell. Even if I were to create the sturdiest cylinder to contain the crystal's explosions, the magical explosion would blow up the pistons, the connecting rods, and all the machinery tied to the cylinder. Gawain frowned. But if all the equipment could be sturdy enough to withstand the magic, perhaps it could work. The equipment would have to be massive to keep it all explosion-proof. Gawain sighed. It's far too monumental a scale to even consider right now. And if it were to fail, all nearby humans would be caught in a fiery explosion. Gawain also gave up on the thought of using Rebecca crystals to build firearms. But perhaps it would be possible to use them with launchers. But without a way to delay the timing of the explosion, nearby people would also be caught in a fiery explosion. Gawain shook his head. If steam did not work and explosions did not work, then maybe he had to discover petroleum somewhere in this world. There was another problem too. Even if he designed a prototype machine, the blacksmiths would hardly be able to forge something so precise. Gawain would have to go to rune craftsmen who worked on precise gear, such as the mithril safe from his old mansion in St. Suniel. Are there rune craftsmen among the 100 workers the king sent? Just as Gawain pondered this, the tent flap lifted up, and Rebecca and Heidi walked in together. "Lord Ancestor, you were looking for us." Gawain wasted no time and pushed the blueprints toward them. "Yes, bring yourselves a chair and come sit here. Take a look at these." Rebecca ran to get a big chair, while Heidi casually lifted her hand and the sculpture hand grabbed a chair in the corner of the tent. They sat and began to peruse the blueprints. Rebecca's eyes sparkled. "What is this? There are so many wheels and connecting rods. Is it also a water wheel?" Gawain smiled. "No, it's a type of machine that can produce power. Visualize this. A type of machine driven by the most basic magic unit. It can produce stable and reliable power, such as allowing wheels to spin continuously, such as making a hammer move up and down. Look at these connecting rods and wheels, and this structure, it's called a crank. These things are able to convert back and forth movement along a line into the rotational movement of a wheel. Rebecca's eyes twinkled some more, soaking in the imaginative designs. Gawain knew that magical machines existed in this world. There were plenty of things Gawain considered ahead of its time, such as the magic puppets mages created, the automatic doors of the vaults, activated by cipher keys, and magic locks that distinguished the user's identity. All were built upon by magical mechanisms. But this was different. The majority of the structure was intuitive. It did not require magic except as a power source. Rebecca thought long and hard for a while. A term that Gawain often said to her finally surfaced in her mind: universality. Just like the magic web, this equipment was also universal. It wasn't designed to be a treasure or work of art. Instead, just like those Rebecca crystals being baked at steelworks, what Gawain wanted was something universal. Gawain pointed at the cylinder that he drew a cross over. Now we're just left with this step. It needs an initial power source so that this piston can move. I'd thought of using expanded gas to complete this process, so I designed this airtight air cylinder, but you don't have to be restricted by my ideas. From the viewpoint of magic, what kind of spell do you think can create a driving energy whose supply can be non-stop and recycled? Rebecca thought aloud. What if we carve a super mini typhoon magic circle inside it, to blow wind hard? Heidi frowned and contemplated this. It's not practical. The typhoon magic circle is too complicated. Besides, the air current that it can draw in a closed environment will be very limited. Heidi casually conjured a semi-translucent sculpture hand beside her. It would be simple if we could use the sculpture hand and propel it inside. Unfortunately, this is a very unique spell. There's no corresponding magic circle. Moreover, it feels strange to have a sculpture hand pushing inside the machine. Sculpture hand? Rebecca let a train of thought unfold. If it's not a must to use air currents, what if we dispose of this thing you call an air cylinder? Watching Rebecca's eyes that were growing brighter and brighter, Gawain could not help but feel delighted at heart. What do you mean? Heidi also became curious. What have you thought of, Rebecca? Rebecca gestured happily. Aunt Heidi, do you remember that I had a spell that I could never learn back then? Heidi frowned. Other than fireballs, which other spells have you mastered? Rebecca shook her head, getting more ecstatic by the second. No, I'm talking about that tricky level 1 spell. You believed that I would definitely be able to master it regardless of how bad I was at magic. Rebecca opened up her palms. I secretly drew runes inside the glove, pretending that I could cast the spell. In the end, I was given an earful from you and Dad. Gawain raised an eyebrow, speechless. Heidi began to nod. She recalled exactly what trick Rebecca was referring to. Ah, you mean the repulsion spell. In this world of magic, elementary spells were categorized as unofficial spells that even apprentice mages would be able to execute. They were extremely easy to learn in normal situations, and the construction of the spells was so simple that even young children could understand. But the corresponding effects were extremely limited, and the functionality was very specific. In fact, many of the elementary spells didn't possess any practical usage for combat or work. They served more as preschool education than anything else. Gawain himself knew of a few elementary spells. The transformation spell had a simplified version called the dye spell, capable of changing the target's hair color for 2 hours. There was an elementary spell called Toughen Will, which summoned a phantom that recited the spellcaster's youthful and sorrowful experiences until the spell was broken. It had an unbelievable effect on strengthening one's resolve. Elementary skills were, by their very definition, elementary. They were trivial, mostly useless, and plain old fun for young mages to learn. Official mages possessed a special distinction from official academies and the noble clans. Though there was no standard test, they viewed themselves as above the elementary spellcasters. Elementary spells were the things of street formers and petty tricksters. Still, they were easy spells that every mage picked up along the way. On the other hand, if one wasn't even able to master a single elementary spell, it would definitely be humiliating. Gawain watched Rebecca's eyes twinkle. She was the queen of failed mages. Gawain raised an eyebrow. You were never able to learn the repulsion spell? Heidi glanced over to her ancestor. Lord Ancestor, you know of the elementary spell as well. Gawain nodded. It's a variant of the elementary spell telekinesis. Repulsion is considered rather powerful, is it not? Master it and you have the foundation for gravity control spells, levitation spells, and the sculpture hand too. It's one of the rare elementary spells that actually have some use in battle. Gawain retreated to his thoughts for a second. All this time I've been thinking of scientific contraptions and chemical reactions. I never paid a single thought to a simple spell such as repulsion. He clenched his fists and berated himself silently. Don't get ahead of yourself, Gawain Gao. You may be a transmigrator from a far more advanced world, but don't be so full of yourself. Rebecca looked at the blueprint. Though she had no idea what a steam engine was or what the sealed cylinder machine that Gawain drew was capable of doing, she grasped Gawain's rough idea and filled in the blanks using what she knew about the world. Rebecca had something no other mages had. She had a tremendous gift of creativity. Heidi grabbed a piece of paper and drew some runes and lines. Rebecca is onto something. The repulsion spell is easy to craft into magic circles. There are plenty of magical mechanisms already that use the repulsion spell. Automatic doors, floor traps, detectors. But to use the spell as a means to create energy in the form of machines, I don't reckon this has ever been conceived of. Heidi handed over the rough sketch. Gawain took a glance and realized it wasn't just drawings of the simplest repulsion magic circle. There were also markings of the corresponding magic effects and the cheapest material for assembly. Gawain smiled. This is just like Heidi, ever so detailed. Rebecca pointed at Gawain's initial blueprint of the cylinders. If we're using the repulsion spell, we can simply do away with the sealed cylinders. Perhaps we will leave behind a protective cover to avoid any foreign material from dropping inside, but it wouldn't need to be so tight. Heidi nodded. We can carve the repulsion magic circle at the bottom for it to push this piston thing. She frowned. But how will the piston return after being pushed away? Gawain placed a finger at a gear-like wheel. Using inertia, this steel wheel's inertia, it's called the sprocket wheel. It is connected to the crankshaft and piston. When the piston is away from the repulsion magic circle, the sprocket wheel will turn and reset the piston. Amber reappeared from the shadows and stared blankly at them as they discussed the mechanics of the machine, mixed with magic circles and magic theory. She squeezed her way through to observe the blueprint too. The gears and wheels and shafts reminded her of the various types of traps she encountered as a thief. She murmured something under her breath. What about the process when the piston is trying to return to the repulsion magic circle? The magic circle will still be pushing outwards when the sprocket wheel is trying to bring the piston back down. The others all paused, surprised by Amber's rather sharp comment. Heidi frowned. That's true. When the piston is coming back down, the repulsion magic circle will counteract the useful forces. Gawain made use of this opportunity to impart them with terms he was familiar with. The useful forces are called work. Quite literally, it is the amount of force applied to an object to cause displacement. And the solution to this issue would have to be one of Rebecca's other innovations. Rebecca thought for a quick second and lit up. Ah, the rune trigger. Gawain nodded. That's right. When the piston comes back down, the repulsion magic circle must turn off. The contraption must be designed so that when the piston gets pushed up by the repulsion magic circle, the two halves of the rune trigger must come apart, deactivating the magic. Then, as the piston is pushed back down by the sprocket wheel, the rune trigger must activate the magic circle again. Symbols of various magic runes floated in Heidi's mind. How are we going to control it? Based on what you said, this piston will move fast, incredibly fast. Magic circles with such a quick reaction would require runes of the highest grade. Rebecca furrowed the little bit of eyebrows she had left after a childhood of practicing fireballs. What if we put half the rune trigger on the piston and the other on the bottom? When the piston approaches the bottom, the two halves come together and push the piston away. Heidi and Gawain shared a look, both of them astonished by the simplicity of the solution. Once again, Gawain could only marvel at the young girl's seamless application of magical knowledge and mechanical knowledge. Does her brain require no cool-down time? How does she come up with a solution just like that? Rebecca's neck withdrew when she stood in the silence. Did I say something wrong? Heidi shook her head quickly. No. This is very good. Your idea has only given me more to think about. What if we carved another repulsion magic circle, one on the top of the mechanism? This way, the piston will receive twice the power in its up and down path. Gawain also lit up with an idea. Rather than fixing the rune trigger inside the cylinder, what if we placed it on the axis of the sprocket wheel? We can design it so that when it makes a half rotation, it'll activate a set of runes for the first magic circle. Then, when it completes its full rotation, the runes activate the second magic circle. Compared to putting the circles in the piston device itself, this allows the most efficient means to keep the piston moving. Rebecca looked at Heidi and then at Gawain. She pouted and lowered her head. As I thought. Both of you have much better ideas, Gawain guffawed. How could you say that? Rebecca, you're the one who founded the theory of repulsion magic circles. Your aunt and I are just building off of what you said. Rebecca's pout remained. But this machine is an idea proposed by you, Lord Ancestor. Gawain patted her head. That may be true, but it will be because of you that this machine will be replicated for thousands of years to come. You're incredible, Rebecca. Truly. Finally, Rebecca's pout disappeared. Really? Gawain and Heidi both nodded. Really? Heidi looked back down to the blueprints. What are you thinking of calling this machinery, Lord Ancestor? Gawain pondered it for a bit before coming to the conclusion that simple was best. Let's call it the magic-powered engine, or just engine, for short. Heidi listened to the unfamiliar and strange combination of words as Rebecca nodded excitedly. I don't understand the meaning, but it sounds very cool. Gawain lowered his head and looked at his sketches as a new idea appeared in his mind. This structure, could it be further improved? Since the repulsion magic circle and the rune triggers already lay the foundation for engines in this world, why don't I try to make an even more advanced machine with an entirely different framework? Gawain thought of electromagnetic force activating electric motors, effectively eliminating pistons and crankshafts back on Earth. Though he told himself not to be too full of himself as a transmigrator in this medieval world, he couldn't help as his mind drifted through all his technical earthly knowledge. This time he combined it with the knowledge of repulsion magic and rune triggers. What if we carved repulsion magic circles in an annular device? That would create a rotor. What if repulsion magic circles were carved in the smallest size, placed at the bottom of a barrel and loaded with Rebecca crystals? That would create a gun. Gawain chuckled to himself. This repulsion spell was quite the revelation on this world. It was a commonplace charm, which made it flexible and usable in many circumstances. Amazing that magic kept me from considering basics like crankshafts and sprocket wheels. With these brute force motivators, Gawain hoped that they could create an engine powered by magic. Even if they used cheap materials, it could still generate massive amounts of magical power. After the discussion of the imitation magic-powered engine was done, Gawain started to think of how to use the repulsion magic circle in the future before Rebecca and Heidi finished the modifications and they verified the details of the blueprint. He had already expanded the use of the repulsion magic circle to the composition of electric motors. Gawain took out a large piece of paper and started to make sketches under the curious attention of Amber, Rebecca, and Heidi. He drew a ring-shaped shell with an inner rotor that had many slanted blades. On the outer shell there were many corresponding repulsion magic circles. The structure was just so simple. This is... Heidi's brows lifted as she asked curiously with hesitation. Gawain put down his brush and spoke with some excitement. A second-generation machine. Amber, Heidi, and Rebecca all looked at Gawain, their jaws hanging open. After a moment, Amber piped up. How does your brain operate? Rebecca bristled. How dare you insult my ancestor? She raised her staff angrily at Amber, then paused. She turned back to Gawain. Lord Ancestor, how does your brain operate? An awkward silence filled the room. A few seconds later, Rebecca realized what she had done. She slapped herself on the forehead. Sorry, Lord Ancestor. Have I spoken without using my brain again? Gawain laughed. He patted Rebecca's head. No, that isn't a problem. He strode over to the other side of the tent, retrieved his water skin, and drank from it. Amber blinked and shook her head, dazed. Not a problem? You haven't even finished with the first-generation motor, and you're already onto the second? This one doesn't even look like the same thing. It looks like it was born from a different mother entirely. Do you just have a stock of pre-made blueprints in your brain? Gawain nearly choked on his water as she said this. Sometimes this rascal hits closer to home than she thinks. He swallowed the water hastily. It's just an incomplete idea, that's all. He turned to Dame Heidi. What do you think? Does it seem feasible to you? Heidi placed her hands on the desk and leaned over the sketch. It's much simpler than your earlier design, but to implement these theories won't be easy. When so many repulsion magic circles are arranged in order, and in such symmetrical and close positions, it looks like it is specially prepared for magic resonance. There is 100% chance that it will cause mutual interference, and it's unknown if it can continue moving after the activation. Gawain scratched his head. He returned to the table. What if the diameter is bigger, and each repulsion point is further from one another? Dame Heidi shook her head. It isn't as feasible. The more the distance increases, the less efficient it will be. Gawain gritted his teeth. They needed magic inhibitors, or at least the materials to make them. This was one part of the construction they could not skimp out on. To compare it to Earth, it would be like insulating wires with diamond. Even if he dropped dead, and Rebecca and Heidi sold tickets to all of Anzu for his funeral, they couldn't afford it. He paused, his head taken aback at this thought. What kind of metaphor is that? He shook his head and spoke. Make a prototype to study when there's spare time. Hummel and his apprentices can make most of the parts you'll need. As for the repulsion mechanisms, Heidi chimed in. There are rune craftsmen amongst the new arrivals from the capital. Gawain nodded. Very good, put them on it. Don't worry about the cost of the new machine. We need to make it work before we can consider mass production. That last order was almost more for him than it was for Rebecca or Heidi. He straightened up. Since you've got your plate full, Heidi, Rebecca will take the lead on this task, but you can check in for technical support every now and again. Heidi and Rebecca rolled up the blueprints needed. Rebecca tried to conceal the joy of being officially the head of a task. She was more successful than usual, though a smile still danced across her face, like a child who had a new plaything. The ladies both curtsied to Gawain and left the tent. As they left, Betty walked in. Betty held a bowl of stew in her hands. My lord, you haven't eaten lunch yet. Gawain waved his hand. Put that on the desk, please, Betty. Amber sat on a pile of books in the corner. Her legs flopped about like a child on a swing set. Betty turned to go. Gawain raised his hand. One moment, Betty. She turned. Yes, my lord. He stood and folded his arms at her. Have you been practicing your writing? She nodded fervently. Of course. His mouth curled upward in a half smile. Good. I've asked the carpenters to make you a study table. They'll deliver it to your table this evening, along with a set of stationery and some white paper. Use them sparingly. Her eyes widened. She nearly leaped into the air and bowed so forcefully that she lost her balance and almost fell onto the floor. In the corner, Amber put her hand over her mouth to conceal her laughter. Betty stammered at Gawain. Thank you, master. Thank you ever so much. She skipped out of the tent. Gawain smiled and shook his head as the naive student leaped into the world. Amber leaned forward on her stack of books. You're so busy all the time, yet still you have enough brain space to take care of that silly little maid. People might start thinking you've unsavory plans for her. Gawain glared at the half-elf. Amber held her hands up defensively. What? You wouldn't be the first noble to make a move on a maidservant. I tell you, I've heard stories. Gawain grabbed her ear and yanked her off the books. Amber yelped. He released her. Clean up your mind, Amber. I'm no pervert. I simply like her diligence and studious drive. But of course you'd know nothing about having a studious mind. Amber rubbed her ear. You always said my brain was clean, Gawain retorted. I always said your brain was empty. Amber sneered at her boss. Exactly. Empty is clean. It can't be dirty if it's empty. Gawain rolled his eyes. You make it possible somehow. He turned to walk out of the tent, followed by his impertinent assistant. Hey, where are you going? You're going to leave this food behind to get cold? Gawain waited for her to catch up. I'm going to have a chat with a metal ball. If you want to come... Amber shook her head quickly. Nope, no worries. You can talk to Sir Eggy von Egg, Eggsquire if you like. I will make sure your dinner doesn't go to waste. Gawain lunged to grab her, but Amber anticipated it and vanished into the shadows. She reappeared a heartbeat later and dug a wooden spoon into Gawain's bowl. Go have your heart-to-heart with the metal ball. I'll have Betty bring you the leftovers. Gawain shook his head. He turned to leave. Some guard you are. If I get killed, I'm having them dock your pay. If you get killed, I'll rob this town blind and move to Typhon. It was late afternoon as Gawain approached the guards who stood in front of the Sphere's special tent. Is there any commotion from inside? The soldiers shook their heads. One barked out a report. No, sir. That ancient magical device is well protected. Gawain nodded. Well done, fellows. Your diligence will earn you extra rations tonight. To their credit, the guards remained stoic, even as the promise of full bellies certainly made their backs stiffer and their faces harden with resolve. Gawain passed the competent sentries and entered the tent. As he entered, he found Nicholas Egg floating in the middle of the tent about a foot off the ground. It looked like something he had seen in a science fiction comic in his previous life. The sci-fi ball seemed to look at him and groaned. Damn it! I thought you had already forgotten that you left me here. There's been no one interesting. Those dumb soldiers. That annoying little old man. Or the lady that always wears a red dress. All of them are very boring. Let me tell you, if this ball didn't value promises, I would have already left this morning. Gawain ignored the nagging of the ball and walked in front of it. I'm here to have a chat with you today. I need to verify something first. Where are you from? I know you can't be from Lauren. The floating sphere recoiled slightly. It seemed surprised by Gawain's question, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was just his imagination. After all, it had no facial features and not much in the way of body language. When it was floating in midair without moving, you wouldn't even know if it was listening, but it did stay silent for 2 seconds before replying. Aren't you talking nonsense? I was transported to this place from another place by you. I am definitely not a local ball. Gawain sighed, exasperated. You know that's not what I mean. He paused, attempting to formulate a way to ask what he was curious about. You must have come from a place that is farther away. After all, you're a metallic ball that can think, talk, and even release strange energy waves with control over magic and metal. I have never heard of such a strange race in this world. The ball's metallic voice replied with a mocking tone. That's because you don't have enough experience. Based on what I've learned from that druid of yours, your race is far behind. How much could you have witnessed in your lifetime? Just based on your measly human eyesight and knowledge from oral tradition, you have very few options in the way of learning. Gawain nodded. The ball was right to a certain extent. In fact, he'd spent his first few months in this world railing against how backward the humans of this world were. Yet, its assessment was still incomplete. Gawain himself had been staring at this world's evolution for countless years. He had been observing this continent before monkeys started to walk straight. He might not have seen the situation in other continents, but no matter how the other continents' life forms were isolated from this place, or how strange they might be, they still wouldn't evolve into a metallic ball from a pile of carbon-based life. Gawain tried to imagine a race outside of his space site that had developed rapidly and reached the zenith of science and technology, allowing them to create this alloy, anti-gravity, and artificial intelligence. If they could exist, they would have had to develop this technology generations ago, especially since this particular sphere was captured by Gondolian mages 1,000 years ago. It was an explanation about as likely as Amber returning the pocket watch to Viscount Andrew's butler. Gawain removed the glove from his hand and pressed it against the ball's cold metal surface. Nicholas Egg cried out, "What are you doing? Be careful, I might—" But the sphere stopped talking. Gawain used what little magic resonance he had been able to harness in this body to transmit a message straight into this mysterious creature's mind. Haven't you noticed how different you are from the rest of the beings in this land? The sphere returned to silence for a moment before replying in the same telepathic method. You can just talk using your mouth. It's just the two of us. Because I know there are some things that you don't wish for others to know. Gawain smiled and said, "Therefore you can just tell me alone." "I don't wish to let you know." Gawain took a deep breath, calming himself. His months of practicing patience with Amber had greatly helped his tolerance for impertinent creatures. "Where are you from? How did you get stranded in this world? How long have you been here?" The bull pretended to be confused. "I don't understand what you're talking about." Gawain sighed. "I can understand why you're reluctant to tell me. It's true, our civilization has regressed. But did Pitman tell you that I was born before the collapse? Furthermore, I have a natural affinity with science." Nicholas Egg silenced again. It was clear that Pitman had told him this. Gawain didn't need this sphere to tell him it was from elsewhere. He knew that based on his own knowledge of transmigration. But he didn't know whether this was a fellow traveller, transmigrated from elsewhere, or simply an alien being. Unfortunately, for this same reason, he couldn't out himself as a transmigrator either. Instead, he could explain that he had another identity, a natural science scholar who came from a developed society 700 years ago. This identity should be much easier for this bull to communicate with as compared to those it saw as fools. Think about it carefully. Your secret might not be as critical as you imagine. He didn't need to whisper as his voice was being magically transmitted to the sphere's mind, yet he still lowered his tone out of habit. "I am not a member of those fanatical religions or those master mages that studied you from 1,000 years ago. I won't try to purify you in the name of some unknown god, nor will I try to break you apart for materials. I simply wish to talk to you. I seek knowledge, and I might be able to help you." With his free hand, he gestured behind himself. He couldn't tell if the sphere was listening, but he had a good sense that it might be. "There's nowhere to go. Beyond the mountains is a wasteland, filled with those monsters that tried to devour you a few days ago. If you head north, you'll just find more stubborn people, like those around here. They're much less open-minded than we are here. You have to stay here, so why not be friendly with me?" He waited on a response. Nicholas Egg was silent. He swore to himself. Perhaps I was too harsh. He spoke in its mind again. "Of course, if you are still suspicious, I can let you go. I suspect it will not go well for you." The bull responded with its metallic and trembling voice. Gawain stopped. "I can't remember, not very clearly anyway." Gawain blinked in surprise. "Can't remember what?" "I don't remember where I came from, or how I got here. You are correct. I came from a very far place, and it is much further than you can ever imagine. 1,000 years ago, your people had the concept of planets and a universe. They suspected I came from beyond the distances they could conceive of. Beyond the universe." Gawain felt the blood pumping in his ears at this revelation. Maybe this ball held the key to his own journey. Yet he kept his emotions in check as he asked a follow-up question. "But didn't you say that you don't remember clearly about your homeland, or how you arrived here? How can you be so certain that you didn't cross the universe and outer space to arrive here?" The bull's voice sounded a little helpless. "I lost my memory, but I didn't lose my common sense. If the two places' laws of physics are different, how can it be the same universe?" Gawain froze. It felt like lightning had just shot through his veins. For months he felt like he had been going mad, a guest from another world who had to fight its physics to make even the basic steps forward. A smile played upon his lips as he looked at this metallic ball. Here was a comrade. A ball, sure, but a comrade as well. It had transmigrated just like him, even though it was a ball. It could discuss concepts like planets and the universe, even though it was just a ball. It was only just now that Gawain realized how lonely he had been feeling for the last several months. Of course, Gawain now had new friends and relatives. Amber, Rebecca, Heidi and Byron were all people that he trusted, but he couldn't discuss such concepts with them. At least, not without many tutoring sessions. He resisted the urge to step back as the surge of emotions and thoughts washed over him. He was verklempt, made dumb by the power of his own feelings. After a moment, he shook his head and asked another question. Are you so sure that you have crossed into a new universe? Have you ever thought the laws of physics in the universe might not have equal proportions? Perhaps each star system might have a different law. The metal sphere sighed. Gawain wondered for a moment how a ball that didn't need to breathe would sigh, but he dismissed that thought out of hand. It wasn't important at the moment. It is impossible. My race is a race of explorers who had spread throughout the universe. We would have noted if the laws of physics behaved that way. Yet they don't. The only conclusion is that I have entered into a new universe. I remember we were researching how to do it, but I cannot remember that. Gawain was dumbstruck. He didn't expect that Nicholas Egg came from such a powerful civilization, one that had explored an entire universe and was researching how to cross dimensions. Possibilities raced through his head. With the aid of this sphere, he could make this new industrial revolution titanic and transform this backwater world into a spacefaring civilization in a matter of years. He shook his head. I shouldn't get ahead of myself. Before he could comment again, the bull spoke. Gawain started. It seemed that this metallic voice was also filled with emotion. It has truly been difficult to find a human to converse with. I'm glad to be able to speak with you. Gawain smiled. Those emotions he had tried to clamp down on surged to the fore. There they were, so different in so many ways, but they had found each other on a foreign planet in a foreign universe. Two fellow travelers, there to help each other succeed in this unknown place. Nicholas Egg was not a dragon egg after all. Even after it hatched into its more silvery appearance, Gawain held out some hope that it would hatch again into a baby dragon. A part of him wanted to train and ride a dragon. How cool would it have been to fly into battle against a horde of dark-wave monsters on top of a dragon? But Nicholas Egg was something entirely different. It lived as a fake rock and kept its secret for centuries. Gawain could only admire its Buddha-like willpower. Finally, it had someone to talk to. And talk Nicholas Egg did. It prattled on about the joy of having a comrade like Gawain and how dull the people of this world and era were. It's remarkable how much civilization here has regressed. Those soldiers standing guard had no knowledge of the atmosphere or geomagnetic fields. The druid called Pitman. There's something wrong with his brain. He made countless trips recently. Each time he kept stroking me and urging me to admit I was a dragon egg. He wanted to know if dragons hatched twice from their eggs. He was so damn annoying, really. I've already left my shell, all right? If I hatch again, I'll freaking die. Gawain decided not to reveal his secret fantasy of riding a dragon. Nicholas Egg went on and on. The female human in the red dress. She held all sorts of strange magical articles against my body all day long. She wanted to scrape some of my body to study. Eeeeee! She scared me to death. She's just like those archmages all those centuries ago. Gawain interrupted. The female human you speak of is my family member, one of my descendants. Nicholas Egg did not temper his vitriol. Oh, then you have to educate her properly. How can you let someone like her be your descendant? Those archmages 1,000 years ago knew something, by the way. I even intended to communicate with them to find a way to go home, but all they were interested in was studying me. Tisk, tisk. If only they were more like you. Gawain observed the ball as it bobbed up and down in the air. How long have you been in this world? The ball drooped a little. I was caught the moment I arrived here. The mages locked me up in that laboratory all that time. I was down there so long that I even learned the language. Gawain leaned in. They never realized you were an intelligent being? Nicholas Egg bounced up vivaciously. Ha! I was cautious. When I landed in this world, I built a protective shell using metal and rock and switched into a semi-hibernation state so they couldn't detect my vital signs. Because I could not understand this world's language in the beginning, I had no idea what was happening. I kept pretending to be a piece of rock and observed in secret. Then those researchers found me and brought me to the laboratory. I'd planned on escaping at first, but even the slightest movement would put them on alert, so I really didn't dare to move. Still, I was pretty lucky. They thought I was an ancient sealed relic or something like that, so they didn't slice me open at the first chance. Nicholas Egg shook, as if a chill had run down its spine. If it even had a spine. It was so unsettling. At one point, they were really preparing to cut me open. But right when they were going to, an order suddenly came that transferred all facility personnel. They added a seal to the laboratory before leaving, keeping me stuck inside for all those years. Gawain made a mental note of everything it said. You said those researchers suddenly received an order to evacuate. The ball floated up and down. That's right. They were told to leave all local samples in the facility, including me. They never realized I was a living thing, so they never avoided me when they discussed everything. Gawain stroked his chin, deep in thought. The ball drifted closer to him. What's wrong? Gawain decided to voice his thoughts. Such evacuation orders would have to be given in a time of crisis. To also order the researchers to leave all test samples is strange as well. The ball paused for a moment. Could it be because the samples were contaminated? Or perhaps something else went out of control when they were studying samples and there was no time to salvage it? Gawain recalled the state of the laboratory inside the mountain. The former is highly possible, the latter, not quite. Although it was an urgent evacuation, the facility was emptied in an orderly manner. Many big-scale installations were taken away, and they had plenty of time to transfer the samples if they wanted. Say, what exactly were they researching in these mountains back in those days? The ball spun around in the air. That I don't know. I wasn't the one doing the research. I was the one being researched. But there were a few occasions where I caught sight of some things as they were transferring me to other labs. You know what I saw? I saw them pushing mutated, completely swollen corpses into the incinerator room. It looked like they were using humans for their experiments. Gawain faltered. Human experiments? What other traits do you remember seeing from those corpses? Nicholas Egg spun around faster, as if to match its cognitive process. Let me think. They were bigger and taller and more deformed than normal humans. I think there were also crystals growing out of various parts of their bodies. One researcher, how did he put it? He called them divine evils. Maybe he referred to the crystals growing out of the tissue. Or maybe the deformed corpses. This language is stupid. Gawain knitted his brows. Divine evils. Religion in the Gondolian Empire flourished just as it currently does. For something to be a divine evil must mean it's a complete rejection of anything any worshipped deity would consider good. It must be the complete rejection of everything holy, the incarnation of evil itself. Questions circled in Gawain's head. The urgent order left the facility deserted. Does that mean those human experiments shared something with this living sphere? Were the corpses still inside the dark mountains? After 1,000 years, have they all turned to ash? The metal ball observed Gawain. You seem a little nervous, my friend. Those research projects happened 1,000 years ago. Gawain frowned. Do you know where they left those samples? The ball swayed. Not at all. I was also classified as a local sample, but those archmages were clearly no fools. They would not confuse me with their true samples, so I never came into contact with the facility's real center. Why? You wish to find those things? Gawain pursed his lips. I think it's important to know what they are. The scale of the ruins in the mountains was massive, almost unbelievable in how massive it was. Gawain had already explored it once with a team, and they nearly got lost. He suspected that the area they'd seen during that expedition was less than 1/5 of the entire facility. Anything could be hidden in the remaining 80% of that massive facility. The metal sphere spun and spun. If you wish to explore, you better be careful. I can't imagine how you would explore that entire massive place with just the manpower in your camp. Gawain nodded. That's right, I will work within my means. Let's move on. We'll talk about you first. The metal ball faltered for a moment. About me? What is there to talk about? Gawain cast aside his thoughts of the facility and gave Nicholas Egg a wry smile. Don't you know how striking you look in this world? Life forms like you do not exist in this world at all. If you run out just like that, how would you introduce yourself to people? The sphere stopped spinning. Hi, my name is St. Nicholas Egg. Gawain chuckled. Nicholas Egg also did its best impression of a laugh. The majority of the people in this era are fools unlike you. What do you have planned? Gawain ruminated for a moment before he looked up. I'm thinking that I will tell people that you are a magical device that stores an ancient soul. People would sooner believe that than anything about space and otherworldly life forms. If that's all right with you, you can roam around in this territory with that identity. Nicholas Egg spun excitedly. Ah, I like the sound of that. Perhaps I was an old king who got betrayed. Or maybe I was a fearsome warrior who cut down an entire empire. Or maybe I was a beautiful princess kidnapped by a dragon. He went on and on, crafting his identity as an ancient soul stuck in a metal ball. Gawain grinned. He sat alongside it and listened to it. Just like Nicholas Egg, he too had a companion from another world. The third day after reaching a consensus with Nicholas Egg, it began to appear in front of the people of the new Cecil territory. From now on, it was addressed as a he. Gawain made a mental note to remember this. Nicholas Egg's appearance naturally attracted a large amount of attention. Even the most apathetic serfs could not help but ogle at the metal ball floating about past the tents and houses. It gleamed with a perfect silver tint and quickly became the talk of town. Few dared to approach at first. Under the sun, it shone so bright it looked as though it might explode. Some screamed and ran away at the sight of something so foreign and alien. But Gawain had soldiers publicize the origin of this magic device. He made sure that they emphasized it was a respectable ancient scholar's soul trapped inside the egg after a magical accident, and should not be treated any differently from the people in the camp. Following that, most people cooled down. The weird looks still remained, but as time passed, they saw that Nicholas Egg was harmless, in spite of its occasional foul-mouthed digs and ill-tempered remarks. Nicholas Egg himself revelled in this situation. From being detained inside a research facility for centuries and treated as the subject of testing, he was now able to live among the humans thanks to Gawain. He had almost been turned into metal shavings by the archmages of Gondolia, but now he had the quiet protection of a Grand Duke. If he had tried to escape the tent, he'd have to continue the rest of his life being a rock. Now, he could roam about as an ancient scholar trapped inside a magical device. However, as Nicholas Egg enjoyed his stroll around camp, someone went to Gawain's tent to complain. Heidi stood before Gawain with a troubled look. That ball keeps floating here and there around camp. Are you really not going to do anything? Gawain had his head bowed, carefully studying the rough register of the 100 technical personnel from the capital who'd arrived a few days ago. Hearing Heidi, he lifted his head. Did that ball make trouble for anyone? Heidi shook her head. Not making trouble. But he's just too curious. As long as he sees people working, he floats over and watches them for a long time. That appearance of his is really too striking. The workers are bound to be affected. Gawain chuckled. Everyone will get used to it sooner or later. It's not some giant dragon, it's merely a metal ball that floats around. Of course, I'll remind him later not to distract the workers as much as possible. What do you think about Nicholas Egg? Heidi tilted her head. Are you sure you're giving him this weird name? Gawain held up his open hands in resignation. That's the name he goes by. Heidi sighed. If you're asking for my thoughts, I'd wanted to study how he levitates from the moment I saw him do so. The aura that he emits is very intriguing. Besides, he is able to float in midair forever without expending any sort of energy. If this is a kind of innate spell... Hang on. Gawain quickly interrupted Heidi's unravelling thoughts. That spherical rascal had been captured and studied for a long time by the archmages of the Gondolian Empire 1,000 years ago. Right now, his psychological trauma is especially severe. If you try to study him, you will cause the hard-earned trust we built to vanish in a flash." Heidi smiled rather apologetically. "Of course, I was merely thinking about it at heart. Compared to that, I'm more concerned about what you mentioned before, the samples being kept inside the ancient fortress in the mountains. I heard you got Sir Philip to organize a scouting team. Are you thinking of going into the facility to search for those remains now?" Gawain shook his head. "No, those are dangerous remains, and we aren't prepared to take on whatever we might find inside. I had Sir Philip arrange a team to investigate the shallow levels of the fortress and check on the forked roads we weren't able to explore back then. The stronghold is massive, and perhaps we can use that to our advantage." Heidi's eyes widened slightly. "You're thinking of—" Gawain nodded. "If there is ever an emergency, we may be able to seek refuge inside the facility." With that, he bowed his head and directed his attention back to the register of the 100 tradesmen. Official craftsmen, 15 including masons, carpenters, blacksmiths, cobblers and more. Another 10 craftsmen who specialize in building houses. Official spellcasters, only 2. One of them is a Grade 2 arcanist. Another is a Grade 4 rune master. Gawain could not help but laugh out loud as he read. Jenny Perot, Grade 4 rune master, the professional with the highest grade in the team. I guess this is considered the king's magnanimity. Well, looks like we have another intermediate spellcaster. Heidi listened to Gawain's words but could not hide her distaste for the fact that this Grade 4 rune master was the highest grade amongst the team of 100 craftsmen. Lord Ancestor, rune masters are mages who specialize in carving runes and magic circles. Compared to conventional mages, their strongest attribute is their steady hands. Though they possess only rudimentary magic abilities, they rise the ranks by consistently drawing magic circles and honing their ability to sense magical powers. Gawain nodded with a sigh. As the poor cousins of the mages, most rune masters were Grade 1 or Grade 2. They were regarded only as slightly better than rune craftsmen, distinguished by their inability to cast any spells whatsoever. Rune masters thus usually ended up as assistants to official mages. Their weak magical power meant that they could barely control their own magic circles. In other words, they are like the eternal understudies of mages. The lab assistant goes unmentioned in scientific journals. Heidi shook her head. The capital shoved this Jenny Perot here to ensure we wouldn't complain. But, in reality, she's only an intermediate spellcaster by name. Sending a Grade 4 rune master is basically insulting our intelligence. If Rebecca trained properly, she could easily be more adept than this Jenny Perot. Gawain sighed. This probably isn't Francis II's intention. That king needs to take my attitude into consideration, so his support for the Cecil territory can't be too fake. However, he has to bear the pressures from the other aristocrat clans of the capital, and those aristocrat clans do not wish to see the Cecil clan rise back up too quickly. In reality, a good half of them probably wish that this old family clan would quietly die in the Dark Mountains. Knowing this, do you think they would allow a capable and valuable technical team to come here? Heidi's expression became grim. Those in their ivory towers licking the king's boots, the Cecil family has completely no inclination to vie against them over any interests, yet they would spare such great efforts to see us fail. Gawain shook his head. This is precisely the code of conduct of the aristocrats. If you cannot accept the way they behave, it only means to say that you're not actually a qualified aristocrat, according to their standards at least. Of course, I wouldn't call myself one either. Heidi perused the list of names. Then, with regards to this register, Gawain smiled, I'd kindly accept it. Why not? No matter what, these are 100 technical talents, even if they were haphazardly put together to make up the numbers. It's still better than having none at all. These blacksmiths and carpenters shouldn't be so bad to the extent that they can't even use hammers and saws. He stood up and rolled the register into a scroll. I want to meet this rune master called Jenny Perot. There was a sentence in her description that had me pretty interested. Heidi raised an eyebrow. Which description? Jenny Perot, apprentice mage. Jenny Perot looked around her small cabin and sighed. She crouched over her bed and pulled a small wooden trunk out from under the frame. She opened her luggage and began removing the items, laying them out on her impeccably made sheets. The newly arrived rune master was tall and thin with silver hair, but she wasn't slender. Her body was bony, as if she had been hollowed out by disease long ago and still struggled to recover. Silvery hair hung over her face, guarding her curious eyes and expressive mouth. The objects she was concerned with were mostly equipment for her rune-making craft: painting sticks, corrosion-proof of course, carving blades, scrappers, brushes. She also had a stack of books and notebooks, which she had maintained over the previous 2 years. Yet among the tools of her trade, the young lady had only packed 2 sets of clothes. Once everything was laid out on the bed, Jenny set about putting them in their proper places. It wasn't a large cabin, just big enough for the one room, but it had a wardrobe and a desk, and a window which let in streaks of pleasant daylight. Jenny dutifully placed the clothes in the closet, the books on her desk, and her tools in various drawers. When she finished, Jenny took a chair and sat in the center of the room. She looked around this modest dwelling that would be her home for as long as the king wished it. She nervously played with her silvery hair. Even though the cabin was basic, she knew she was lucky to even have a room to herself. It didn't compare to the Mage Tower she stayed at in Saint-Soniel, but it was certainly as good as any house in the Cecil township. Among the team, only the official craftsman and the other mage were qualified to have a solitary house. Furthermore, she had the largest house among all the houses, so she was already very satisfied. Jenny watched everything quietly before lowering her head to look at her hands while contemplating her future days. She was very clear of her awkward position. She was skilled in rune-making, but only an apprentice mage. Runemaster was handicraft work. Her ability to detect magic and weave spells was all that separated her from the masons and carpenters who came to this land on the White Oak. Actually, according to mage custom, the Grade 2 Arcanist in the team should be the one with the highest status. Thus, it was very obvious that she was just an intermediate professional to fill up the numbers. She feared that Grand Duke Gawain Cecil, the 700-year-old ruler of this clan, would immediately sense this and determine her as redundant. She hopped to her feet and unlatched the wooden window, opening it to let some air in. The breeze tickled her face pleasantly, but it didn't assuage the worry in her heart. After all, she had no idea how long this position would last, or even how long she would be given the treatment of an artisan, not just a common labourer. It would probably last until the moment the Duke believed he had saved face with the king, or until someone in the territory raised an objection. She knew that the one thing that would keep her place was her runecraft. She looked outside over the camp. It was an impressive sight, but everything was still in progress. Based on cursory observations, she presumed it was still in its construction phase and would definitely need a vast quantity of runes. Dame Heidi Cecil couldn't possibly be doing everything personally, hence a rune master like her would be useful. If she could complete her tasks well, she might be able to receive the approval of the dame. Jenny didn't dare to have excessive expectations and would be perfectly satisfied if she could simply keep her footing in this place. Jenny jumped at the knocking on the door. After a moment, she scurried over. Her belly squirmed with worry and anxiety like a knot of worms. She had no idea who could be interested in her now. She closed her eyes to center herself. Whoever is there, I will put my best foot forward. Jenny opened the door and gasped. She beheld 2 figures standing before her, both tall and imposing. One had brown short hair and abstruse eyes. It was Gawain Cecil, the Grand Duke of this land. Alongside him stood Dame Heidi, cutting an elegant and beautiful figure as always, in her signature red dress. Jenny's mouth hung open. The feudal lord and the chief supervisor had come to visit personally, which left her at quite a loss. Could this feudal lord already feel that he is giving me excessively preferential treatment? As Jenny was in a state of astonishment, Gawain sized up the rune master before him. He reckoned the thin woman couldn't be much older than 20, yet it wasn't her height or her silver hair that caught his attention. It was what was behind her hair. Jenny had a large scar twisting across the left side of her face. It crossed down her cheek and her neck before disappearing under her clothes. It looked like some sort of burn, which had healed partly, but left this winding reminder, like a canyon carved out from dragonfire. Gawain averted his eyes quickly, well aware that it was rude to stare at a young lady. He cleared his throat. "Miss Perrot, I suspect you know who we are. I am Duke Gawain Cecil, and this is Dame Heidi Cecil. May we enter?" Jenny blinked, seeming to come out of a trance. "Why, yes, of course, come in." Gawain and Heidi walked in, taking in the small cabin. Jenny rushed over to the bed and shoved her empty trunk underneath it, hastily. She was suddenly incredibly self-conscious of how she had arranged her new home. Jenny rubbed the back of her neck and looked away awkwardly. "So, my lord, why did you wish to personally visit?" Gawain shrugged. "I wished to see how you were adjusting to life in camp." Gawain glanced around the room. He didn't see any evident personal items nor any luxuries this rune master had brought from the capital. She must have been in dire straits in the capital, just as I thought. He turned to her again. "How have the first few days been? Are you satisfied with life here?" Jenny laughed awkwardly and grabbed 2 chairs which she placed for Gawain and Heidi. They were the only 2 chairs in the house. She decided to stand by the window rather than sit on the bed. "Very, very satisfied. To be honest, it is much better than I imagined." Gawain sat on the chair and looked at his host curiously. "Imagine? What did you imagine?" Jenny furrowed her brows, confused. She answered hesitantly. "Well, everyone calls this a camp, so I expected, tents barely clinging to unfriendly ground, ramshackle huts at best. I'd heard that it only began construction 1 month ago. I didn't think there would be so many houses, a smithy, a dock, farms." Gawain nodded. "Everyone has been working exceptionally hard this last month. But to be honest, I don't consider this a quick construction. I've seen a whole city built in a month. On Earth, where we have cement." He didn't voice this thought aloud, though. Jenny blinked, dazed. Then she seemed to understand. "Oh, I see. You mean in the Gondolian Empire?" Gawain hastily nodded. "Yes, my previous life. Anyway, worry not. The brick kiln has already begun construction. Soon we'll be able to have people move into brick houses." Jenny nodded slowly. Dame Heidi smirked on her seat but didn't make any remarks. Jenny's pulse still raced. After all, Gawain hadn't yet brought up the preferential treatment, and yet it seemed that topic was drifting away. In her head, Jenny was wildly theorizing about how Gawain seemed to be making this camp to the standards of ancient Gondolia. But Gawain wasn't aware of this train of thought. Instead, he once again diverted the conversation. "We're here today mainly to have a look at your living arrangements and to get a sense of what kind of requirements our guests from afar would need, and also to understand a bit about you." Jenny froze again. "Understand about me?" She pointed to herself, as if not quite believing what she was hearing. "What aspect are you referring to?" Dame Heidi took out a piece of paper and pushed it in front of her. "I will ask bluntly. We have seen your information. You are a grade 4 rune master, but your mage grade is that of an apprentice?" Jenny's heart sank. As expected, what was supposed to come would eventually come. Her skills in runes were far superior to her magical abilities. She worried they'd think that she had somehow faked her credentials. The rune master from the royal capital bowed deeply and used the most humble and most terrified tone to seek forgiveness. "I am sorry, Duke and Madam Heidi. I didn't have the intention to deceive you. I am willing to accept punishment." But Gawain suddenly interrupted her. "How did you do it?" Just as Jenny was doing her best to arrange her words to extinguish the noble's anger in her imagination, she didn't expect that Gawain would be calm and ask a question all of a sudden. She stopped speaking. Her mind went blank. Her eyes darted from Gawain to Heidi and back again. Gawain leaned forward in his chair. "How did you complete the foundation practice of a rune master as an apprentice mage? Are you able to sense the magic of complex runes? Are you able to conduct magic tuning on runes?" He asked the question simply, without judgment. Rune masters were indeed craftsmen. In the eyes of professional mages, their work wasn't any different from masons, but Gawain knew clearly that there was a difference, and that it was a big one. He raised his hands. "Let me be more explicit. Normally, a mage cannot succeed at rune-making until they have at least the skill of a level 1 mage. How did you accomplish this all, as a mere apprentice? Gawain watched Jenny. The silver-haired waif of a rune-maker took a second to collect herself. He found himself wondering about her treatment. In his eyes, the fact that she was far more skilled at rune-making than magic was something unique to be investigated. She seemed to think it made her a freak. If drawing magic circles were as easy as following the blueprints, any layman would just be able to replicate designs. All one would need is a steady hand. Apart from the production and repetition, rune masters needed the ability to create and adapt according to situations. They needed to be able to assist mages to produce magic tools or draw the magic circles on various complicated magic-guided materials. Each magic tool and magic-guided material had different attributes, and when put together, there could be countless variations. It inevitably meant that they couldn't just draw magic circles according to the blueprints. They had to change the rune sequence on the magic circle according to the materials and the function of the magic circle, or they would have to make minute adjustments to the rune dispositions and the methods of connections. They were musicians who needed not only to understand the score on the page, but be able to improvise within the same key, time signature, and melodic structure. In short, the rune masters were creating blueprints. Each time they drew, they would draw the first edition of the blueprint and make a new creation. To do these two things, one had to be an official Grade 1 mage. Apprentice mages definitely wouldn't be able to do such things, as apprentice mages didn't have the ability to sense and control complex runes. Their magic wasn't precise enough and couldn't be released outside their bodies. If they could do these things, they would have graduated. Jenny's information clearly stated that she was an apprentice mage. Jenny had heard Gawain's question clearly during the first time, but she didn't know how she should reply. She hesitated and considered for a long time before she lowered her head and said, "It was luck, my lord." Gawain scoffed. "Luck?" Jenny lowered her head still further. "I have great intuition and would always be able to find the correct method to arrange the runes. You should know that there is a certain rule for rune sequences. With enough experience and intuition, one would be able to accurately arrange those." Gawain stood up from his seat, causing Jenny to involuntarily jump in place. "If it was luck, then you would be dead, burnt to a crisp. I may only be a knight, but I know how magic works. And I understand the basics of rune sequencing. If you couldn't sense or tune the magic circles, you might have burned the capital to the ground in experimenting." As Gawain talked, he stared at the silver-haired young lady in front of him. He crossed his arms. "Raise your head and tell me the truth. Without the ability to sense and tune, how are you able to know each position of the runes and the effects each rune would generate?" Jenny began to shake uncontrollably. Heidi sighed. She suspected her ancestor was being too harsh on this young woman. She recalled that Gawain had instructed her to assume the roles of a stern individual and a lenient individual, depending on how the situation was going. So she stood and walked up to Jenny. She placed a gentle hand on the apprentice's shoulder. "You don't have to be nervous. This isn't the royal capital that has strict rules, or the oppressive and inflexible association of mystics. We welcome and encourage all actions that would be beneficial to the construction of the territory, even if they are a little unorthodox." Jenny swallowed and seemed to stop shaking. She glanced over to Gawain. The Duke nodded. "I can guarantee that creative ideas are protected in this place, because I am the law of this land." The silver-haired apprentice mage took a deep breath in. "It actually isn't creative. I just use logic and calculations." She turned to her desk and retrieved a thick notebook that sat on the table. Gawain reached his hand out. "May I?" She promptly held out the tome. "Of course you are the feudal lord." Gawain opened up the book. Even though it appeared weathered and old, like an ancient spellbook, it was actually a book of handwritten notes. The yellowed pages were filled with runes, numbers, calculation methods, diagrams, etc. There were writings that were already blurry due to wear and tear. He grunted in surprise as he flipped through the book. Jenny cocked her head. "What?" Gawain didn't take his eyes off the book. It looks like there were at least 2 different writers in here, am I correct? Jenny nodded. 4, actually. Gawain smiled but kept rifling through the pages. He was rather impressed. Going page by page, Gawain found himself getting quite giddy with anticipation. Written in the margins were notes that even his sophisticated understanding of physics and mechanics couldn't decipher. He skipped over some pages that were glued in, since he suspected he would need a whole night and several casks of ale to properly decipher them. In the back he found even more notes glued in, like the medieval version of a post-it note. There were massive quantities of formulas, rules, and logical deductions filling up this paper attachment. There were also a lot more on the page behind this attachment. Gawain merely took a glance and judged that this was already a summary and derivation that had practical value. He rubbed his eyes and closed the book. He looked at Jenny, newly fascinated by the mind underneath her silver locks. "Are these summaries you're doing?" She shook her head. "Not all of it. I've only written part of this notebook. As we just said, the rest are my predecessor's legacy." A shadow drifted over her face as she mentioned her predecessors. Gawain furrowed his brow. He opened the book again and looked at the first page. Something nagged at him in the back of his mind. His eyes widened. He snapped his fingers and turned to Heidi. "Did you bring that notebook along? The Rogue Mage's notebook?" After he had transcribed what he deemed were the useful formulas, Gawain had given the Rogue Mage's notebook to Heidi for her studies. Heidi nodded and reached into her shoulder bag. "I have it. I just happened to be researching the interchangeable rune combinations inside it for the past 2 days." Gawain took the book from her and walked over to Jenny's desk. He placed both notebooks on the desk and compared the 2 writings. Gawain was no expert, but even at a glance he could tell that the handwriting in Jenny's book matched the Rogue Mage's penmanship. Gawain's mind raced. Is this also one of the Rogue Mage's legacies? But continued by 3 other individuals? Jenny looked over Gawain's shoulder curiously. Her eyes widened as she cottoned onto what Gawain was examining. "This," she pointed at the Rogue Mage's book. "Do you know the owner?" Gawain didn't take his eyes off the writing. "I have met him, yes." He pointed at the passages in her book that matched his own. "Since you have this, may I presume that you met him as well?" Jenny grimaced. "Alas, no. By the time this book came into my possession, it had already passed through several owners. But where is that mage now? Is he here in camp?" A light had appeared behind her eyes, like a child on the first day of a holiday. Gawain hated to disappoint her, but he had to tell the truth. "I'm sorry to say he has already passed away. This is all that's left of his legacy. Or so I thought, until you presented this." Jenny deflated at this revelation. "I'm most sorry to hear that." Gawain straightened himself up. He didn't wish to dwell on disappointment, especially when they were near some sort of breakthrough. "It was his time. But anyway, you said this notebook has switched hands 3 times. Where are the previous owners? Those people who carried on the research, are they in the royal capital or the Association of Mystics? Can you contact them?" Jenny winced. The shadow across her face darkened. "I'm afraid to say, they are dead too. The second died while on a quest. The third was Master Ravencrest, my previous master. He was on a mission arranged by his mentor. Constant E equals 1.66 is his legacy." Jenny Perrault presented the complete stories of all the previous owners of this notebook. Gawain was correct. The original owner of the notebook was the Rogue Mage. He didn't leave his name in the notebook. Jenny kept her hands together respectfully as she spoke. "I only heard of him as an eccentric senior mage shunned by the rest of the community. I heard he came from the Violet Kingdom in the north. Though he was inducted into the Association of Mystics, his magic power was far too weak, leading him to become ostracized. His research veered into a territory considered unorthodox in the eyes of traditional mages." The rest of the story Jenny told, Gawain knew. The Rogue Mage left the Association of Mystics, settled in the Anzu Kingdom, and searched for a cure for his sick daughter. Gawain guessed he sold this notebook to raise funds for his move to the quiet cabin where he would die. Or perhaps he had given it away freely among a pile of books he no longer found useful. Jenny continued on about the second owner. He was in a similarly miserable situation. The second owner carried out unorthodox research too. It's commonplace for weaker mages to do so in hopes of a breakthrough discovery that lands a promotion. He failed with runes, so he doubled down in logic and mathematics to explore the truth of this world. According to Jenny, the rogue mage's research on the universality and hidden rules of runes paved a path for the second owner, allowing him to explore the mysteries of magic. Jenny shrugged a little. But this second researcher did not go far in this path. Soon, for some reason, the mage perished on an adventure and the notebook was transferred posthumously into the hands of a great mage. She swallowed and continued. This great mage despised the contents of the notebook. He was, in many ways, an orthodox mage. He didn't believe the calculations of two low-grade mages. He saw them as futile, desperate attempts to poke at a larger truth, in the same way a burrowing ant might boldly assume that its colony is big. He believed the second mage lost his life in a nonsensical adventure, misguided by calculations written in the pages. As such, this mage threw the notebook in a pile of trash outside his tower. It was picked up by my master, who was an apprentice at the time. Gawain listened to Jenny go on about Ravencrest. Among mages, there are two kinds of apprentices. Those who are considered true trainees of the master, and those who are treated like dirt. The former are those with great talent or high nobility. The latter are everyone else, used as experiment subjects and labourers. My friend was the latter. Jenny sighed. Due to his inferior magic talent, Ravencrest was treated like dirt. Though he had an exceptional talent for mathematics and logic, he was, like the first two owners, ostracised by his master and the other apprentices. The great mage never taught Ravencrest anything, forcing him instead to take magical drugs that forced Ravencrest into becoming an official mage. He was nurtured into a rune master whose sole job was drawing magic circles. It was around that time that Ravencrest obtained the notebook from the pile of trash and became the third owner. She paused with a melancholic smile. A few years later, I met Ravencrest. Heidi crossed her arms. And what kind of mage are you? Jenny Perrot's lips curved up higher. Do you not see the pattern emerging from all the owners of the notebook? She looked down, playing with her silver hair. I came from a family of low status, from a village far from the capital. With little talent and no relation to a noble bloodline, I failed to even be selected as an apprentice of the lowliest kind. Heidi raised an eyebrow. How did you become this Ravencrest's apprentice then? Jenny's smile disappeared. That year, a blight spread across our farmlands, destroying all the crops. The scarcity of food got so bad in the winter that the village distributed old shoes and fabrics as sustenance. Still, it wasn't enough. On the brink of starvation, a miracle occurred. Jenny closed her eyes. She vividly remembered the sound of the caravan wheeling by the village on the coldest day of winter. Ravencrest happened to pass by the village. He claimed he would be willing to show some kindness in exchange for an experimental subject. So the village gathered everyone to draw lots. Of all the children, I was chosen. The next morning I was exchanged for 4 sacks of wheat. In the caravan there were herbs, animal specimens, all kinds of rocks, tree bark, and a few other children. She paused. I was brought to the Mage Tower by the Lord Mage as an experiment subject. There I learned that Ravencrest was an apprentice mage with only a slightly higher status than me, sent to gather experimental materials on behalf of the Great Mage. Gawain leaned forward. What were they researching? Jenny continued with her story. To this day, I still don't really know. Each day, a child was brought into the main facility. Some returned alive. Some never did. If they returned, they never spoke again and quickly grew gravely ill. By the time it was my turn, I'd already resigned myself to my fate. At least I was worth 4 sacks of wheat, I thought. At least I'm the reason my family has hope to make it through winter. Heidi and Gawain exchanged a glance, both flooded with sympathy. Jenny twirled her silver hair nervously. The day it was my turn, I was brought into the main facility and told to stand on a magic circle. As it started to glow, thoughts raced through my mind. Was I going to combust into flames? Was my brain going to turn into scrambled eggs? What kind of pain was I going to face? To my surprise, the magic circle's glow dimmed. Ravencrest stepped in with a surprised look on his face. Jenny, You have an affinity for magic. She looked up at Gawain. It turned out I had some magical talent, and because of that, I was allowed to become an apprentice. They gave me a mage's surname, Perrault. As you may know, it means wheat. I went from a subject to an apprentice, but the two weren't all that different. Still, I was glad to be alive and learned to read and practice magic. I picked up on runes and spells and words, and soon enough I realized I had a similar manner of thinking as Ravencrest. Jenny smiled again. We became good friends despite the age difference. It was at this time that he revealed his treasured notebook and explained to me the unbelievable findings rooted in mathematics and logic. With both of us only possessing weak magical strength and basic magic education, we used the notebook's contents as the basis of our own worldview. Gawain wanted to cut in, but Jenny moved on with the story. Upon realizing that my affinity to magic would never blossom into a true talent, the great mage gave me a vial of magical drug and told me to begin practice as a rune master. It was the most I could ever amount to, he said. Before I could drink it, Ravencrest proposed to me an alternative. Why not believe the notebook's contents and attempt to control those runes without the assistance of magic, but with mathematics and logic instead? So rather than take the painful drug, I drew the magic circle with the help of the notebook. Little did I know, I would draw what was probably the first mathematical magic circle in the world. Jenny's smile became bitter. The great mage hated it. He flew into a rage and found out Ravencrest was the one who suggested this dirty trick. He found out that we had been studying a notebook he had thrown away. It was utter humiliation to him, and he was prepared to burn the notebook and punish us. At this moment, however, Ravencrest confronted the great mage. To protect me and the notebook, he lost an eye, a quarter of his soul, and 2 tendons. He managed to convince the great mage to let them continue researching the notebook's theories. Ravencrest said if they discovered anything, all credit would belong to the master. Heidi sighed. And if you failed, he would lose nothing at all. Jenny nodded. So he let us continue the research. Whenever he passed by, he mocked and scorned us. He called us serfs trying to guess the king's lunch. Without the ability to sense and control runes, how would we be able to gauge their power? Surely it wouldn't be possible with mere calculations. Gawain crossed his arms. The official mages of this land may have narrower vision than the blind. Jenny chuckled a little. We were used to the mockery, so Ravencrest and I pressed on with the research. We looked into a strange rule in all magic circles, the idea that some materials had a positive and negative effect on the output power of the magic circles. The agreed-upon thought was that the arrangement of runes was guided by the positive and negative alignment of materials used. In other words, the way the runes were drawn dictated the potential of a magic circle, which was why an affinity to magic was so important. What we discovered, however, was an invisible constant that influenced not only the magic circle, but also the positivity and negativity of the runes. Jenny sighed. Before we could get to the bottom of it, the great mage gave us a sudden task. There was a magic well that lost control, and we were to reset the rune formation. Heidi scoffed. Apprentices fixing something as big as a magic well? That's like asking a beetle to push a boulder. Jenny nodded. It was a job for an official mage, but the master's order was absolute. He said to us mockingly, Didn't you say all runes can be modelled after your formulas? Go remodel the magic well's runes. Gawain began to understand what Jenny had said in the very beginning. Ravencrest. He accepted it because he saw it as an opportunity to prove your master wrong. Jenny smiled weakly. He went on his own. Before he departed, he told me he would adjust the runes according to our conjecture. If he returned alive, it would mean that the constant equaled 1.29. If he didn't return, it would mean the constant equaled 1.66. Gawain looked down at the notebook, and the constant E recorded was in Jenny's delicate handwriting. E equals 1.66. So, what exactly does it mean? E equals 1.66? Gawain couldn't help but ask the question at the top of his mind. It was Heidi who answered. It's the key coefficient to solving what the rogue mage had failed to do. Gawain nodded. When he spoke again, his tone was unexpectedly amicable. "What is your master's name? This great mage that you speak of?" Jenny stuttered. William Birkin. He isn't a palace mage, but is a mage of great standing in St. Soniel. He is the honorary advisor of the Royal Mages Institute, and he's very powerful." Gawain nodded quietly. "William Birkin, honorary advisor of the Royal Mages Institute, got it." Heidi felt that the atmosphere was too stifling and tried to shift the topic away from the oppressive master. "What happened after? Are you still continuing to research the book's contents?" Jenny nodded. "I pretended to give up on the theories in the notebook, but I continued to study them in secret. Originally, Master Birkin also developed the slightest interest in the notes, but he disdained reading them in detail. Instead, he sat by and watched what we could come up with. Ravencrest's death seemed to prove that the research in the notes was all wrong." Gawain pointed to the constant E. "So does he know about this?" Jenny shook her head. "It's impossible for him to ever know the existence of E equals 1.66. He disdained reading the notes in detail and made all judgments based only on impressions." Gawain shook his head. "He has no idea what he is despising. Neither does he know what he has let slip. Better yet, he doesn't even know that he had let something slip. I have never heard of such a foolish and ignorant person." Jenny's eyes widened slightly. This was her first time hearing someone use the two words foolish and ignorant to evaluate her master, to evaluate an archmage who had an illustrious reputation in the Royal Mages Institute and even an honorary seat in the Association of Mystics. She did not dare voice her agreement with Gawain. She dropped her head slightly and went on. "I slowly trained as a rune master after. Master was once curious how I was able to complete the adjustment of runes with magic techniques at the apprentice level. But he still had many other matters to pay attention to, and lowly apprentices like me are innumerable in his mage tower. Very soon his attention was shifted away from me until not long ago. News that the king wanted to organize a Southern Borders pioneering team came. Various aristocrats in positions of power and influence began organizing this team, and Master Birkin came to me." Heidi scoffed. "So you're here because of Archmage William Birkin, packaging a Grade 4 rune master with the foundation of a mage apprentice into an intermediate professional and arranging for her to join the team." Jenny nodded with a bitter smile. "He probably just wanted to get rid of a burden. After all, in his eyes, I've always been considered someone who is neither obedient nor talented." She turned to Gawain. "Grand Duke Cecil, I wish to remind you that I am not an exception. Half of this 100-men team has been shoved in like that to make up the numbers. Most of us are outcasts, radicals. We are either burdens with no status or hold an empty professional rank, just like that Grade 2 official mage, Santis. Although he is a Grade 2 arcanist, he has an inherently frail arcane power and can only continuously release 3 to 4 Grade 2 spells. And the Carpenter Blues spent half his life studying gears, but was ostracized by the Carpenters Association because he was not good at socializing. He'd been kicked from the association many years ago. Not until the organization of the pioneering team this time did the association find him, reinstate his status as a member, and add him to the team just for the numbers." Heidi's mouth hung agape. Did these capital aristocrats have to go so far? Gawain, however, could not help but break out in laughter. "We ought to thank them instead. Thank every clan who had a hand in this matter, and also thank Master Birkin. These imbeciles would never know how much wealth they've let through. Radicals and rebels. This is the perfect group of people to welcome into our territory. If people who cling to old ideas were to really come over, I wouldn't want them." Heidi watched Gawain with a worried gaze. "Ancestor, you don't have to cope like this." Gawain waved his hand and looked at Jenny. "Let bygones be bygones, Miss Jenny Perot. You've arrived at your new home. Toss all your past fears and worries aside. You may continue your research openly and as you please. Not only will I permit that, but I will even support you. From now on, you may go to Heidi's to collect materials for rune research every month. I only have one request." Jenny felt like she was walking into a trap. In great shock, the words rolled off her tongue. What request? Gawain pointed to the notebook. Sort out the research. Sum them up into simple and straightforward formulas and theorems. I can tell from your notes that you are a practical researcher. You are good at using data to arrive at these formulas. And I happen to have someone who can complement you in my territory, my descendant, Rebecca Cecil. She is a girl who is very quick-witted and also skilled at mathematics. I will have you two study these together. I hope that the results you ultimately find could be a... Gawain stopped and chose his words carefully. A few seconds later, under Heidi and Jenny's curious gazes, he found the most suitable word. Textbook. I hope that you can tidy all these into a textbook that can be understood by as many people as possible. Of course, that is the ultimate outcome. It is a wish of mine, and it will be really tough to achieve. You can take it slow and let me know if you lack anything. Jenny stood there, still in disbelief. Are these notes really that important? Do you want to foster runemasters like me in great numbers? Gawain smiled. Foster runemasters? No, I plan on making the contents in this notebook in the days to come general knowledge for every spellcaster in this territory, and potentially general knowledge for every person. With that, he stood up and pushed the thick notebook back to Jenny. Keep it well, protect it well, and if you have the time and chance from now on, it'll be best to make a copy of it. Knowledge is even more precious than the book itself. The writing from the first owner has started to blur. Jenny nodded fervently in a slight fluster. Yes, I will definitely make a copy. Gawain grinned. Great. I shall get going then. Rest well, and I will introduce Rebecca to you at a later time. Gawain and Heidi left the small wooden hut, leaving Jenny staring dazedly at the thick big book in her hands alone. She pinched her arm. She wasn't dreaming. She thought about her family who had nearly starved that one winter when she was 14. She thought about Ravencrest, who she had spent hours with poring through the notebook. The burn scar on her left cheek started to throb with a dull pain. This red patch was a remnant of the first time she walked into Master Birken's laboratory. She had stood on top of the magic circle as a test subject. It had accompanied her for 5 whole years, a reminder of where she came from. It had healed long ago, but the pain resurfaced all of a sudden. As the pain subsided, she finally understood. The burn scar had hurt all this time, every day and always. The pain had become such a constant that she began to regard it as normal. She numbed herself to the hurt until she felt nothing. She began her life as a test subject in the magic tower. Then she was a mere tool, a lowly apprentice to Master Birken for years on end. It wasn't until today that she was able to pour out the things she kept in her heart all that time. Only now did she gradually feel that she had recovered some consciousness of a living person. The numbness gone, Jenny winced sharply as she touched her old scar. So, a living person does feel pain. Tears gathered at the corners of Jenny's eyes. She hugged the notebook which bore the work bequeathed by 3 generations of its owners and her painstaking effort over the years. And for the first time she let herself be consumed by pain and hurt and feelings and the totality of the human experience. She broke down crying, chest heaving. The tears washed her beating heart with relief. Even as she cried, she made sure not to soak the pages of the precious notebook. After leaving Jenny's small wooden hut, Gawain's expression darkened. Heidi cautiously glanced in his direction. Lord Ancestor, is everything okay? Gawain cursed under his breath, then aloud. Those imbeciles, those ignorant fools, sick in the mind, all of them. He lashed out with more expletives, ones that Amber taught him, and ones he used commonly back on Earth. Heidi looked away. You mean this Archmage? William Birken? Gawain scoffed. That piece of dirt has the cheek to call himself Jenny's master. I am ashamed to be of the same species as him. Heidi shook her head too. Traditional mages are all obstinate, but I never thought someone could be so stubborn, so blind. Jenny and Ravencrest already achieved significant results, yet this Archmage turned a blind eye to all of it and sent Ravencrest to his death. Gawain snorted. For what reason do you think William Birken had overlooked Jenny and Ravencrest's results, ignoring the existence of those formulas? Heidi made a guess. Because their magic capabilities are low, So their research isn't credible too. Gawain raised a finger. That is only a symptom of the true reason. It is because Jenny and Ravencrest are slave apprentices. Call it whatever you want, but they were slaves. This was enough for that mage to deem the two as a different species from himself. He never paid attention to what results they'd obtained from the very start. He didn't look at all, didn't think about it at all. What he noticed was that his slaves are not complying with orders. On top of all that, the research that Jenny spoke about, he was actively finding children as test subjects, killing them in order to fuel his research. Gawain stopped and placed his hand against a wooden pillar of a half-finished hut. He needed something to lean against. Though he was only 35 in Gawain Cecil's body, he felt his blood pressure rising. He couldn't afford to have a heart attack now. He took a breath and calmed himself. A moment later, Heidi suggested, "We can send a document to the king. Given your title of duke, it's impossible for the king to not respond." Gawain let out a long sigh. No, it'd be useless. Since these 100 people who were scraped together have arrived at our territory, do you think that the king would do anything? It is true that the influential aristocrats in the capital had meddled with this team, but since the group of 100 is here now, it means Francis II had at least assented to this matter. Heidi nodded, understanding what Gawain was getting at. Because he already fulfilled the required etiquette and customs. As king, he did no wrong. Gawain started walking again. That's right. These are the customs and etiquette of aristocrats. All the people of this era recognize that. Heidi followed after. Then what do we do? Gawain remained stern as he headed back to his tent. Customs and etiquette will not protect these people forever. They do not know what is coming for them.